Montana Territory, 1879. The pantry door slammed shut behind her, and the bolt clicked like a final word. Sierra Whitlow pressed her back against the wall, eyes wide in the dark, the scent of onions and pickled cabbage thick in the air. Her fingers still stung from the broken glass. One jar, just one, and Mrs. Langley had dragged her by the arm, muttering about carelessness and ungrateful mouths. "You will learn," Mrs. Langley had hissed, "not to drop what others paid for." Sierra was 19. She had not cried when her parents died of fever 2 winters ago, nor when she had taken the train west to work as a housegirl for a rancher's widow with too many rules and not enough warmth. But now, in the dark, alone and locked in a pantry over spilled peaches, tears burned hot behind her eyes. She slid down until her skirts pooled around her knees, hands wrapped around her stomach to quiet the hunger already gnawing. Outside, the wind howled over the plains. By morning, her legs ached and her throat was dry. No one came. Not until the sound of boots on wood made her jolt. Then a voice, male, younger than the ranch hands. "I'm looking for Mrs. Langley," he called. "Got the cattle papers from Sheridan." Sierra's heart thudded. The pantry door was thick. She pounded once, then again. Silence. Then the footsteps returned, slower this time. "Hello," she pressed her face to the seam in the door. "Please." Her voice cracked. "Help me." A pause, a breath. Then low and sure, "Where are you?" "Pantry, left of the stove. She locked me in." There was a grunt, then the sound of a latch being forced. The bolt gave with a scraping twist. The door swung open. Light flooded in. And there he stood, tall with a dust-covered trail coat and a mess of dark blonde hair that curled behind his ears. His face was angular, weathered from sun and saddle. But it was his eyes, clear blue, steady, that made her breath catch. He looked at her, crouched on the pantry floor, pale and shaking. "You do not belong here," he said. Sierra blinked. "What?" He reached a hand out. She took it. "You heard me." He helped her to her feet. "You don't belong in a place that locks people up like animals." "I dropped a jar," she murmured. "Then she should have cleaned it up," he said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. She stared at him, unsure if she was dreaming. "Who are you?" "Kade Nolan," he said, letting go of her hand. "Cattle broker. I came up from Wyoming." "Why did you open the door?" "Because you knocked." Sierra looked down at her bruised fingers, the glass still crusted at her nails. Kade's voice softened. "Have you got anyone else?" "No," she said. "No family, no one." He looked around the cold kitchen. "She feed you?" "Sometimes." He shook his head, jaw tight. "Get your things." "What?" "I am not leaving you here." Sierra stared. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you were locked in a pantry overnight for a spilled jar, and that your eyes look like they ain't seen kindness in too long." Something inside her cracked. She nodded. It took only minutes to gather her few belongings: an old shawl, a faded green dress, and a small wooden box with her mother's brooch inside. Mrs. Langley returned from town in a rickety wagon just as they were stepping off the porch. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. Kade stood in front of Sierra. "She is done here. You cannot just take her. She is not your property. She signed a year's work." "I will pay it," he said, pulling out a money roll from his coat. He peeled off bills without blinking. "That should cover every jar in your pantry, Mrs." Langley sputtered, red-faced. But she took the money. Kade turned, his hand at Sierra's back. They walked. His horse, a tall chestnut gelding, waited near the outer fence. He helped her up without a word, then climbed behind her. The sun was just rising, gold spreading over the flat land. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice small. "I have a cabin south of Miles City," he said. "It is quiet. There is work if you want it, or just rest." "You do not even know my name," she said. He smiled, the first time she had seen him do it. "Then tell me." "Sierra." He nodded. Suits you." They rode through the morning light, wind soft in her hair, the warmth of his chest behind her steady. For the first time in a long time, Sierra did not feel afraid. She just leaned back into the safety of someone who had seen her, heard her, and chosen not to walk away. Kade's cabin stood a few miles off the main trail, tucked in a low dip between cottonwoods, where the wind softened and the world felt held. They arrived by late afternoon, the sun slanting through the trees in long amber strokes. Sierra slid down from the horse, her legs unsteady, but she didn't ask for help. Kade didn't offer it either, only watched to see if she needed it. The cabin was built narrow but deep, with a sod roof and small porch. The door hung slightly crooked, but the hinges were solid. He pushed it open and stepped aside to let her pass. Inside, the air smelled of pine pitch and old tobacco. A stone hearth took up one wall, blackened from years of use. A cot stood in the far corner with a wool blanket folded at its foot. A rough-hewn table occupied the center of the room, two mismatched chairs tucked beneath it. Everything was plain, worn, but clean. "You can take the bed," Kade said, setting his saddlebags near the door. Sierra hesitated. "Where will you sleep?" "I've got a bedroll." "Porch'll do." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Wind doesn't bother me." She traced the edge of the table with her fingers, her throat dry. "You live out here alone, for the most part." He unbuckled his gun belt, set it on a shelf above the hearth. "I ride cattle in the spring, mend fences in summer. Come winter, I trap along the Powder. Keeps me fed." She glanced at the shelves' tin plates, a sack of beans, a canister of coffee, no flour, no sugar. "You don't keep much," she said. "Don't need much." Sierra sat down, smoothing her skirt beneath her. Her hands wanted something to do. Her body still felt like it belonged in that pantry, still curled tight, still braced for cold words in a colder house. Kade busied himself with the stove, feeding kindling into the iron belly. The fire caught slowly. When it did, it filled the room with a quiet warmth. She watched him in the glow, how his movements lacked haste but not purpose. "You always help strangers?" she asked quietly. "No," he said, "but you didn't feel like one." She looked down at her hands. The bruises had already begun to yellow at the edges. "I won't be a burden," she said. "I can cook, mend, tend to animals. I've done all of it. You don't owe me work. I want to earn my place." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "All right." A silence settled, not sharp like the ones in Mrs. Langley's house, but open. It didn't press. It waited. Kade spoke again, voice thoughtful. "I knew a girl once. She was taken in by a family that didn't want her either. Spent more years trying to be good enough than living. What happened to her?" "She left," he said. "No one remembered her name after." Sierra looked up. "Will mine be remembered?" Kade's eyes met hers, steady and clear. "It already is." The wind shifted outside. A hawk called overhead. The fire crackled. She rose to her feet, walked to the hearth, and reached for the coffee pot. "You have any grounds?" He pointed to the tin canister. "Middle shelf." Sierra found it and poured a careful scoop into the pot. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of doing it for others. But now no one barked orders. No one watched her with narrowed eyes. "You want a cup?" she asked. Kade nodded. "If it's not trouble." She poured two, setting one in front of him. He took it with a nod of thanks. They drank in silence, the kind that wrapped around the edges of tired hearts. After a while, Kade said, "I've got a neighbor a few ridges west. Widow named Alden. Keeps chickens and trades eggs for help with firewood. Might be worth meeting." Sierra nodded. "I'd like that." He finished his coffee and stood. "I'll bring you by when the weather clears." She watched him gather his bedroll and step outside, the screen door creaking softly behind him. Alone in the cabin, Sierra looked around. Her box sat on the table, unopened. The fire warmed her back. She didn't know what would come next. But tonight, she had a name that was remembered, hands that poured coffee for someone kind, and a place where the door didn't lock. The next morning broke colder than the day before. Thin frost clung to the window glass, and the air in the cabin clung with the scent of old ashes and pine smoke. Sierra woke before full light, the stillness pressing gentle but firm against her ribs. She sat up slowly, the wool blanket slipping off her shoulders. She found Kade already outside, crouched near the small woodpile to the left of the porch. His coat was dusted with snow, his movements quiet as he split kindling with a hatchet that looked older than she was. His breath drifted in soft clouds that vanished as quickly as they formed. Sierra stepped outside, the door creaking behind her. He didn't look up. "You warm enough last night." "I was," she said. "You need more wood." "I'll manage," he said, and split another piece. The sound echoed through the trees. "You sleep light." "I always do." He set the hatchet down and stood. "I'll ride out to the stream today. Traps need checking." "I want to go." He studied her for a moment, not as though doubting her, but weighing something quieter. "You ever ride in snow?" "Not far." "But I can hold a saddle." Kade nodded once. "You'll need better boots." She followed him inside. He opened a cedar chest near the hearth and pulled out a pair of old leather boots with worn soles but solid stitching. They were too big, but she stuffed them with linen and laced them tight. By the time they saddled the chestnut gelding and his small dun mare, the sun had risen, pale and without warmth. The snow wasn't deep, only a thin layer that crunched underfoot. They rode east through a narrow stand of spruce and down a slope where the land flattened into a frozen marsh. The horses moved slow, their breath steaming. Neither of them spoke much. The quiet between them had changed, not empty now, but full of something unspoken and careful. At the stream, Kade dismounted and moved to the traps. The water ran sluggish under a skin of ice. He pulled up the first line and found a rabbit, neck cleanly caught. He handed it to her without comment. Sierra took it, surprised at how steady her hands felt. She'd helped dress chickens before, but this was different, wild, silent, honest. "You always trap alone?" she asked. "Usually." "Why?" Kade crouched near the next trap. "Folks talk too much, fill silence with noise they don't mean." She watched him reset the line. "And me? You listen before speaking." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. They worked together until midday. By then they had 4 rabbits and a mink, its fur thick and silver dark. Kade wrapped the animals in burlap and tied them to the saddle. As they mounted up again, Sierra glanced at the horizon. "What's west of here?" "Past the ridge. Couple of homesteads. One's the Alden place. Another's a cattle family with too many sons and not enough patience." "Think they'd have work?" Kade looked over at her. "You looking to leave already?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. I want to know what's out there." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was even. "There's always something out there, but not all of it's better." They rode back in silence, the horses picking their way through the snow-crusted brush. When they reached the cabin, Sierra unsaddled the gelding while Kade stacked the pelts in a crate near the wall. She skinned the rabbits behind the cabin, her sleeves rolled and her hands sure. Kade watched from the porch, a tin mug of coffee in his hand. "You do that like it's second nature," he said. She didn't look up. "It has to be." He was quiet a long moment. "You ever want something more than surviving?" She paused, knife poised over the last rabbit. "I think I did. Before." "Before the pantry?" he asked. "Before. Before fever, before the westbound train, before Langley's cold house and colder words." She nodded. He came down the steps and crouched beside her. "You're not there anymore." She met his eyes. "Sometimes it feels like I still am." "I know." His voice was low. "But you're not." She finished the last cut and sat back, Her fingers were numb, speckled with blood. He reached out and gently took her hand, turning it palm up. "You're not broken," he said. "I feel like I am." He shook his head. "You were bent around something cruel. You're unfolding now. That's all." Sierra looked at their hands as larger, rough from years of work, but holding hers like it wasn't something to be fixed, only understood. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The wind shifted. Somewhere beyond the trees, a hawk circled low. Sierra stood first. "I'll start the stew." He watched her walk back to the cabin, her shoulders no longer drawn in tight. When she opened the door, warmth spilled out. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The next few days passed beneath low skies and the kind of cold that worked its way into joints and quiet places. Sierra took to the rhythm of Kade's cabin without question. She rose early, swept the hearth, and kept the stove fed. Her hands stayed busy mending a frayed saddle girth, boiling lye soap, soaking beans overnight so they'd soften by midday. There was no one watching her movements, no voice correcting her gait. Only Kade, who came and went in measured intervals, returning with pelts or fence wire or nothing at all but the dust of the trail on his coat. On the fifth morning, a knock came at the door just as Sierra was pulling a pot of barley from the fire. She glanced at Kade, who had just hung his coat. He gave a small nod and stepped aside. Outside stood a woman in a slate-gray shawl, her cheeks wind-bitten and her boots caked in mud. She looked to be in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a mouth set like it had more to say than it ever would. In her arms was a basket lined with canvas. "You must be the one Kade brought in," the woman said, not unkindly. Sierra straightened. "Yes, ma'am. Kade said you had hands worth trusting. I could use help at the Alden place. My hens have gone broody and my boy's down with the lung. I can offer eggs and lard, maybe a sack of cornmeal if you're willing." Sierra glanced at Kade. He didn't answer for her. "I'd be glad to help," she said. The woman nodded once and handed over the basket. "Tomorrow morning, first light. 2 miles west, red barn with a slanted door." She turned and left without further pleasantries. After the door shut, Sierra looked down at the basket. Inside were 6 eggs, a wrapped slab of salt pork, and a folded scrap of wool. "She always like that?" she asked. "Only when she likes someone," Kade said. Sierra smiled for the first time that day, a small thing that came from deeper than laughter. That night, she sat on the porch with her knees drawn up beneath her shawl. Kade was finishing a repair on his bridle, the leather stretched across his lap. "I think she's testing me," Sierra said, watching the moon rise. "She's testing if you're steady," he replied, not looking up. "Most folks out here don't ask what you came from, they ask what you'll do next." "I don't mind that." She pulled the shawl tighter. "It's easier than explaining." Kade set the bridle aside. "You planning to stay?" She turned her head toward him, slow. "That depend on you, no," he said. "But I'd like it if you did." She exhaled, not quite a sigh. "I'm not used to being wanted anywhere. I didn't say I wanted you here out of pity. I didn't hear pity." They sat in the hush of that truth, the night stretching out around them. Then Kade said, "You ever learn how to shoot?" She shook her head. "My father didn't think it proper. I think it's practical." Sierra looked out toward the trees. "I'd like to be practical." "Tomorrow," he said, "after the Alden place, I'll set up a few bottles by the fence. You can use my rifle." She nodded. "All right." When they stood to go inside, her hand brushed his. He didn't move away, neither did she. Inside, the fire had burned low. She banked it while he latched the door. When he passed her by on the way to his bedroll, he paused. "You did more than survive that house," he said. Sierra met his eyes across the dim room. "I want to learn how to live." Kade gave a single, quiet nod. "You're doing it." She lay down that night with the sound of wind in the eaves and the weight of something new settling in her chest, not fear, not caution. Just the slow trust that maybe she was no longer alone in the world. Sierra rose before the first light touched the trees, her breath clouding in the dim cabin as she laced her boots. The alder shawl hung from the peg near the door, still smelling faintly of smoke and lard. She wrapped it around her shoulders and stepped outside, careful not to wake Kade. The air was sharp against her cheeks, and the ground crackled beneath her steps. The Alden place sat low against a hill, its red barn leaning slightly eastward like it had grown tired of holding up its own weight. Mrs. Alden met her at the gate with a nod and a rusted tin pail. "Hens need fresh bedding. Boy's fever broke last night, but he's still weak." Sierra worked until her back ached and her palms stung from scrubbing troughs and hauling straw. She didn't mind. The animals didn't speak, didn't look at her like she owed them something just for standing there. When she'd finished, Mrs. Alden handed her a cloth sack with cornmeal and a few onions. As Sierra turned to leave, the older woman asked, "He treatin' you right?" Sierra paused. "Better than I've ever known." Mrs. Alden gave a single, quiet nod. "Then don't let fear talk you out of it." By the time Sierra returned, the sun had risen past the pines, and Kade was setting glass bottles along the fence rail, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He glanced toward her, then pointed to the stack of firewood. Short barrels leaning there, stocks light, good for a first shot. She picked it up, surprised at the weight. He showed her how to brace it, how her shoulder should catch the kick. They didn't speak much. He watched her hands, adjusted her grip once, then stepped back. She pulled the trigger. The bottle shattered, glass flashing like ice in the grass. Kade didn't praise her, just nodded and handed her another round. By the end of the hour, only 2 bottles remained. Her shoulder ached, and the air smelled of powder. She turned toward him, flushed from effort. "I didn't think I could do that." "You didn't think wrong," he said. "You just didn't know yet." That evening they ate stew made from the last of the barley and rabbit Kade had salted. He said little, but she noticed he took the smaller portion and passed her the thicker slice of bread without comment. After supper, he sat by the stove and sharpened his knife, the whetstone murmuring with each stroke. Sierra sat across from him, legs tucked beneath her. "Do you miss anything?" she asked. He didn't stop sharpening. "Sometimes I miss the quiet before I knew what loneliness was." She studied the way he held the blade, careful and exact. "I think I miss being young enough to believe everything would stay good." He looked up. "Do you think it can be good again?" "I think it already is," she said. "In pieces." He set the knife down. "Why did you really open that pantry door?" she asked. "You could have walked away." Kade leaned back, elbows resting on his knees. "Because I'd seen someone locked in before and didn't do a damn thing. I wasn't going to live with that again." Sierra let that settle. The stove ticked as it cooled. "I'm not leaving," she said. He nodded once. "I don't want you to." She crossed the room slowly, sat beside him on the floor. Her hand found his, their fingers tensing before easing together. He looked at her, not with question but with quiet certainty. "I know how to be alone," she whispered, "but I'd rather learn something else." He brought her hand to his lips, the gesture slow, like he'd waited years to make it. They didn't speak again that night. When he stood, he didn't reach for his bedroll. Instead, he laid another quilt across the cot and held out his hand. Sierra took it. That winter passed with fewer storms than expected. The roof held. The fire never went out. She traded work at the Alden place for flour and seeds, and Kade fixed the barn roof before the spring thaw. They built a pen for chickens, and when the snow melted, Sierra planted onions by the porch and strung a line for drying herbs. She stitched a curtain for the window so the light would fall softer in the mornings. One evening, as they shelled beans in the last of the daylight, Kade reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a narrow ring of twisted silver. "I found this in town," he said. "Trapper was trading it for tobacco, said it came from New Mexico. I thought it might fit you." Sierra took it, her fingers trembling. "It's beautiful," she said. "I figured you should have something that wasn't just useful, something that meant something." She slid it on. It fit like it was made for her. They were married by spring, under the cottonwoods behind the cabin. Mrs. Alden stood witness, holding her boy's hand. There was no preacher, just quiet vows spoken over clasped hands and the sound of wind through new leaves. Years passed, but the rhythm remained steady. Kade rode less, traded more. Sierra's garden grew wider each season, and the cabin grew fuller with jars and woven baskets, and the scent of sage drying in the rafters. They built a cradle the year her belly rounded softly, and Kade carved its legs with wildflowers. Their daughter was born on a still September morning, her cry strong and sure. Kade held her like she was made of glass, and Sierra watched him as he whispered her name into the quiet air. They named her Mercy, and in that cabin beneath the cottonwoods, with the fire steady and the wind low, Sierra knew this was what it meant to be safe, to be chosen, to be loved without condition or fear. She had not just survived, she had returned to herself. And in Kade's arms, she found what she had never dared hope for, a life made whole.